What up, Wizards? It's the Big Doofus from SB Goofus down there, here today with one of my favorite videos of each season, because every single spoiler season, it seems like every new set gets more and more hype. There's more and more content creators out there nowadays, so it just seems like every card gets covered to death. But even with that atmosphere, there's still a bunch of cards that end up falling through the cracks, don't get talked about enough, or really at all. And sometimes, those are the cards I'm most excited for. So let's do it, as usual, top 10 sleepers in Crimson Vow. Let's go.
And I'm your favorite Magic Channel's favorite Magic Channel. Best believe that the professor go bananas for my deck tech.
And we're back. Now, hey, before we get into it, just remember to like and sub sandwich. But now on to the content. It's quick and painless. I respect your time. Now, I like to start these lists with a nice honorable mention. And often that honorable mention is one that I don't really expect to succeed very much. It's just kind of a janky card that I think is cool, a bit of a booby prize. And I don't think there's a better fit for that card in this whole set than Stensia Uprising. If I had to bet on it, I would probably put a lot of chips on the idea that Stensia will be in absentia, but I still kind of like this card. It's fun to think about. It's a cool little thought experiment. You have 4 lands when you play it, plus the enchantment, plus the creature that gives you EOT, so you're already almost halfway there. That's 6 permanents. Well, if you played a creature on turns 1, 2, and 3, that's 9 permanents, so you're really close in that case. But then you get to thinking about things like you see a pair of goblins, which gives you 2 copies of a creature, and there's a lot of creatures that put blood tokens into play, maybe even more than one. Like maybe this is how we break Odric. Right? So we get a bunch of blood tokens off Odric. That gets us to 13 permanents super quickly. And we're able to hit for 7. And maybe you have multiple copies of Uprising in play, right? So you're putting multiple creatures in play every turn, plus the 2 enchantments, plus the 4 lands, plus any other creatures you have. It might actually not be super hard to hit on like turn 5 or 6. For 7 or 14 damage with a couple of pairs of these. So, and you might have to sacrifice a thing in between the triggers. This could work either way. I think that this is actually a really interesting card, but I would be amazed to see it show up in Standard. But when you get to thinking about it, at least it makes a creature every turn, a chump blocker if nothing else. It's a never-ending creature factory. Those tend to be okay. It doesn't do nothing when you play it. At least you get a 1/1. So there are some like typically kind of decent things about the card, but I'm pretty sure it's not enough to actually make the card playable. But I will say, if it happens, I will fully support the Uprising. I mean, Clarion Spirit, the more you think about it, there's like a million things that actually facilitate this kind of nicely. So, I don't know. I kind of like it. I got my eye on it, but it's not good. So let's move on to number 10, which is another red card that is probably lame. But that's usually what the first like 5 entries on a sleepers list are, right? Is all this is stuff Dev likes and no one's talking about. Like, even if they only get the chance to be talked about for 2 minutes at most in one video, at least they got a spotlight. So let's talk for a second about Kessig Flame Breather. I think this could actually go really well with like Thermo Alchemist. You basically play 8 Alchemist in Standard, and that's like actually kind of neat to think about. But this is in some ways, can be better than Thermo Alchemist because it can attack. Like, it's actually kind of neat to think about lines where you come in with this, and if it doesn't get blocked, even if it does get blocked, screw it. You play like a pump spell on it, or you play a pump spell on something else. But if this is your only creature and it goes unblocked, you play like some sort of Infuriate variant on it to give it a couple of extra points of power, and it also hits for an extra damage, and that's true of any burn spell you can play. So if you play like 2 spells on this in a combat step, it can actually get reasonably large, hit for a lot of damage, and do a couple of extra damage at the same time. So that's one thing Thermo Alchemist just can't do, and that's just kind of a neat wrinkle to the card. So especially if you have multiple copies in play, if you have multiple copies in play with Thermo Alchemist in play, if you're able to set that up somehow, then you can actually just crack for like, I don't know, 4 or 5 easily with like a play with fire. So I don't know, man. These are the kind of cards that I get way too excited about because they're almost never competitively viable, but it's also a card that almost no one's talking about, and I know I'm going to try. I mean, we just got Reckless Impulse, right? That new light up the stage thing that fuels this really, really well. You rip for 1 off of this, get a couple of spells to cast, ping for 1 off of each of those. I mean, like, there are things that fuel this in Standard. Expressive Iteration, so many things. So, I don't know. I'm just always into, like, Blue-Red Thermo Alchemist. When you give me the chance to play 8 Thermo Alchemist, I'm going to get excited about that. Number 9 is one that I've been thinking about for way too long, because it's probably not worth the thought, honestly. The emotional energy that I put into Boarded Window is probably way too high at this point. The card's probably not great, but it excites me for a few reasons. I'm always looking for cards that might go well in like a colorless matters kind of deck, a colorless tribal sort of. And this is not the worst 3-drop in the world. It really isn't. It might not be great against control decks, but even against Auron's Epiphany players, here's a line you probably haven't thought about. But let's say that your opponent attacks with Goldspan and 2 birds. You take 3 damage. Boarded Window sticks around. Like, that's actually kind of interesting when you think about it. You're halving the damage from Goldspan plus 2 bird swinging, so they can't just like, I don't know, outright kill you with like 2 or 3 turns in a row with just those things attacking. Also, you put this in play with, you know, a Redain on the next turn or something. You play Redain's like shield half, and your opponent just like can barely touch you. You're almost never going to have to sacrifice your windows. Or maybe you don't even play a Redain. Maybe you go windows into windows. Card looks really interesting in multiples where you go like windows, keep my windows, windows, keep my windows, windows, keep my windows. If you have 3 windows in play, like, it's going to be really tough for your opponent to ever do anything to you in a game of Magic. So, or at least combat-wise. So, I'm just really interested in this card. Again, far more than I should be, but you just don't see colorless cards that are this interesting too often anymore. So, of all the colorless cards in the set, this is one of the very, very few that's caught my eye. Also, I think it's kind of cute. We get Defenestrate in one set, Boarded Window in the other. I don't know. I thought that was a cute thing no one has said yet. But anyway, number 8 is Gift of Fangs. This is a great card, man, I think. Apparently nobody else does. This actually is unlike some of these other cards in that it actually has an entry on the Spikes subreddit. Somebody decided this was an interesting enough card to put on Spikes. But it is pooped all over by nearly every single poster on the site. Mostly because Aura's bad. It's mostly because Aura's bad. But I would say that there's a few matchups in this standard where Aura's not terrible, right? Like, at least, especially this Aura, if you're in the Vampires deck. Now, first of all, it's a deadweight. It's just a deadweight. I wouldn't go so far as to say it's a strictly better deadweight, but it's, like, as close to... I mean, is it? Right? The only way it's not strictly better is if your opponent's playing Vampires. That's, like, it. But it's mostly a strictly better deadweight. That's also just an Unholy Strength sometimes. It's a better card than Unholy Strength for 1 black mana, and that's... Maybe I'm just too old school and I still think Unholy Strength is like a viable Magic card, and it's not. I can admit that it's not, but this is at least better than Unholy Strength. And in the mono-green matchup, it's going to make all your like random 2-power vampires stack up to like Old Growth Trolls, Asika's Chariots. That's actually kind of nice. Against mono-white, there's not much they can really do about this either outside of Brutal Cathar, Skyclave Apparition. But note that both from the mono-green deck, the Blizzard Brawl, and the mono-white deck, Brutal Cathar, Skyclave Apparition. These are all sorcery speed removal options, so you get at least like 1 turn in with your 4/4 attacker or whatever. And in some cases, that's going to matter. Like, imagine a line where on turn 3, you go Bloodthirsty Adversary into Gift of Fangs. And there's a couple of ways you can use it. You can get rid of the opponent's Luminarch Aspirant with your gift, or you can put it on your Bloodthirsty Adversary and go ahead and swing for 4, and that's a pretty good deal. I think this card is, in fact, a very important gift for the Vampires decks, and there's not a whole lot in this set that I saw that pushes those decks into competitive viability, but this may be one of these sneaky things that makes that deck a little bit better. They got a lot of good spells this set. They got the 3-drop like Sweeper that hits non-vampires for 2. They got the like 3-mana Blizzard Brawl effect that gives like all your dudes +1/+1 or +1/+0 and a bite effect. So they got Vampires got some really sweet spells in this set, and I think this is just one of the cool ones, but no one's talking about it, so I wanted to shine a light on it. Number 7 is Blood Fountain. This is just, first of all, the flavor is hilarious. I wanted a chocolate fountain at my wedding. They get a blood fountain. By the way, we did not get the chocolate fountain. That is a bit much. It turns out I should have guessed. But in any case, Blood Fountain is just really interesting. Just 1 black mana for 2 artifacts on the table. And that's cool for a few reasons. Maybe in Standard, you want it in your Oswald Fiddlebender deck, and this gives you 2 things to sack. You sack the token to go get another Blood Fountain. Or you can just sack the Blood Fountain to get a 2-drop artifact, which is, I don't know, like kind of, it's neat, at least. And then there's Galazeth Prismari, right? This ramps you by 2 when you play your Galazeth. So, like, even if you played no other artifacts, you played this turn 1, play Galazeth on turn 4, and you immediately have 2 mana to spend. So, like, it's actually not terrible either. I think this would go really well in the future. It's sort of the definition of a sleeper. You know, a card that has to wait for whatever reason to be prominent, be playable. And later on in 2022, we get the Brothers War set. It's set in Dominaria. It's apparently about Urza versus Mishra. Cannot freaking wait for this set, by the way. Haven't talked enough about it. I'm really, really jacked for this freaking set. But I would imagine that set's going to have something to do with artifacts, and probably a number of payoffs for having a bunch of artifacts on the table. So, and it might even have a number of important creatures that you might want to keep on the table for combo purposes or synergy or whatever. So this card does a lot, you know, for that deck. Eventually it'll put 2 artifacts on the table for 1 mana, and eventually later in the game get like any important creatures back put on the table. So I don't know, they go in your hand, but then you can just play them. Just to clear that up. But I think this card has a lot of interesting little layers to it that could help out one deck or another. It could be a really important role player. You know, again, in one deck or another, whether it's right now with Oswald Fiddlebender, which I don't think is very possible, or a year down the road, which I think is much more possible. But number 6, this is a card I just cannot stop thinking about. This is Storm Chaser Drake, ladies and gentlemen. It's a 2-mana 2/1 flyer, so it's already like not the worst thing in the world. But it's got this ridiculous line of text on it. You target it with a spell you control, draw a card. So like pump spells, draw a card. That's unconscionable. That's so good, man. Like, even if you're just protecting it with a Fading Hope and putting it back in your hand, at least you draw a card. But there is some truly heinous stuff you do with this, like Homestead Courage, for instance. Draw 2 cards for 2 mana and you get 2 counters on your Drake. So you have a 4/3 flyer. That seems like really gross. It's probably the best thing you can do with this. But even if you just cast, like, you know, again, just like Fading Hope, things that protect it, like Valorous Stance is in this format. So cast Valorous Stance to give it indestructible. You also draw a card for that. That's so good. And like in blue-green, you can Snakeskin Veil this, put a counter on it, hexproof when they try to remove it. Oh, draw a card. Like 1 mana. It's just so silly. Some of the things you can do with this. Also, I always take the name of this card like really literally when I read it. Like in my mind's eye, I picture Drake, the person, the rapper Drake, like chasing tornadoes. He's turned into one of those weird storm chaser guys. So again, my mind works very literally, I guess. But number 5 is a card that might actually work really well alongside Storm Chaser Drake, and that's Winged Portent. Now, this could be just bad. Like, let's say you've just got swept, you don't have any flyers out whatsoever. Card's just terrible. It draws 0, sits in your hand, rots. So let's acknowledge that the card could not be very important for that reason, but I do kind of like this. I still can't help but like this. There are a number of non-embarrassing 1-drop flyers in this standard, but even in the set, we just saw a 1-drop flyer that's like not actually super embarrassing to play. It's not on the level of like Into the Story, right? But I still think in a deck like Rogues, you could compare it to Into the Story. It's kind of the replacement for Into the Story in Rogues. Depending on how many creatures that you have. So, I don't know. It's kind of cool. Like in blue-black treasure decks where there are some other non-embarrassing turn 1 flyers like Eye Twitch, for instance. And some not embarrassing turn 2 flyers. Right? So, in black right now. So, I could see like maybe using some sort of treasure generation to get the green mana and actually cast the 6-mana version of it sometimes. So, there's a lot of cool stuff with this card when you think about it. But again, let's acknowledge that sometimes it literally does nothing. In board states, which are not super uncommon, this can draw 3 at 3 mana at instant speed. So I think this card might actually be worth looking at more than it seems to be getting looked at right now. You know, all the way up here at number 4, somehow, maybe I should have reordered the list, is Creepy Puppeteer. Elmo doesn't look too awful to me. I mean, okay, so the floor on this. 4 mana, 4/3 haste. It's actually not so bad. It's really not to swing 4 haste for 4 mana. If you just got swept or something, like this still can swing on the control opponent. Often while they're tapped out after the sweeper, so that's nice. So, like, again, the floor on this card is 4 mana, 4/3 haste. It doesn't say you have to attack with only 1 other creature either. So, like, if you've curved out that game, if you've gone, like, Fireblade Charger into 2-drop, I don't know, into Reckless Stormseeker, into this or something, you can still attack with all of those dudes. And in that case, adding a 4 mana, 4/3 haste to the board and attacking with all your other guys is probably still, like, enough. Boy, that was, like, all of my knuckles that just popped. Sorry. Didn't mean to annoy you with that. But, But still, yeah, it's probably just fine if it attacks on curve. But there's also going to be a lot of game states that I can picture, at least, as typical game states, where you drop this on turn 4, and even if you've curved out, you just want to attack with it and like a Fireblade Charger. You know, make the Fireblade Charger's base power 4 till end of turn. And then if it dies in combat, you shoot for 4. That seems pretty good, but you're still swinging 8 while leaving a creature or 2 up for defense. And that's pretty valuable. In this format, that 4 power can swing pretty well into an Eskus Chariot or an Old Growth Troll or a Goldspan Dragon, right? So, like, just the 4 base power is a pretty relevant stat line, no matter what you're swinging with, but it doesn't have to swing with just one other creature, I will remind you again. So, I don't think this is so bad. Like, Green just saw a 4-mana 4/4 haste trample that, like, people are going nuts over. Like, everyone's talking about that card. Like, oh, there's a 4-drop mono green needs. And, like, this is a 4-mana 4-power haste with upside and, like, crickets. So I think we should be paying a little bit more attention to Puppeteer. Oh, and one last thing. Let me also say, turn 4, swing this and eye twitch. Just like a low-power flyer or something. That's kind of fine, too. Or you can take a first strike creature, right, and make them much bigger. All of this is good. So it's a fine card. But where are we? Number 3. We're in the top 3. Holy crap. Number 3 is Aerith. A few reasons I like this card. It kind of sounds like a record skip. Aerith. But aside from that, like, if Narset was still legal in the format, this would be a pretty great card to have against that, but it's not. But still, this does make things like Consider. Effectively draw 2 for just 1 mana, and like a bunch of other stuff. Like we just saw that thing that gives like trample and +1/+0 for each copy of it that's in the yard, and it draws a card. So that gives trample and a boost and draws 2 now with this thing out. It's bolt proof, right, with 4 toughness. The stats are like at least okay for the 3 mana. And when you untap it on the table, you can just start going off. Like Tormenting Voice Effects, draw 4 now. Like pretty kind of nuts, right? Like in the right kind of Is It Spells deck, which I think there's like 5 different builds of Is It Spells that are semi-viable right now. This card could really just go over the top, but who's talking about this card? Not a lot of people. I'm just not sure why. Like most of the praise I see for this card is like, well, it's a good brawl commander. Like, what are you talking about? It's a fine 3-drop in standard right now. So I like this card, and I don't know why you don't. What's your problem? Man, people. I think I'm just going to become an ill-tempered loner. Oh, hey, they made a card for me. Number 2 is Boros Reckoner. Basically, right? Oh, and hey, by the way, wouldn't you know it, just like when Boros Reckoner was in the format, there's a stupid infinite combo with this card. Have you heard about it? I wouldn't blame you for not having heard about this, because like almost no one's talking about it. And I think it's actually really cool. In case you haven't seen it, it's Angel Fire Ignition. Now, sometimes this is all you're going to need, because your opponent may not have seen this combo, and they will do you the favor of blocking your ill-tempered hermit after you Angel Fire Ignition it, at which point you end up in an infinite life gain loop. But I'll explain that in a second. But most of the time, if your opponent does know how cards work, you count on your opponent to know how Magic works. Although if I'm your opponent, sometimes you can get away with a lot. But in any case, the way this is going to work a lot of the time is you're going to have to like Angel Fire Ignition it and then point a Play with Fire or some other burn spell at it. Well, the card can deal damage to itself. There's nothing stopping it from dealing damage to itself. So it can infinitely target itself with its own ability and never die because it has Indestructible. And since it has lifelink, you'll gain life every time it hits itself with its own ability. So in that way, you can just sit there and gain infinite life, which is pretty sexy. But aside from that, let's say you have like a Dina or Marauding Blight Priest out. Well, then I think you win the game. So that's pretty cute too, right? Like at that point, it's like a 4-card combo. So it's a little tough to pull off. But I think it's interesting to think of in like a Boros deck that might just play these cards because they're decent cards. And then it can just incidentally hit this combo every now and again and gain infinite life. But it can also do other good stuff. But there's also more fair stuff. And the word fair here just means not an infinite combo. It's actually not super fair. Like, just picture this card with a Blizzard Brawl. It's pretty sick. You're going to fight a creature, give it Indestructible as well, +1/+0, kill the creature it fights. It's going to take damage from the creature it fights, kill something else, or just knock your opponent in the noggin. So, like, I don't know. Like, it's Just this with fight effects like Blizzard Brawl and the Green Inscription, like that all seems nice. But there's also things like Crush the Weak out of the sideboard or Cinderclasm, whatever your low stakes red sweeper is that doesn't kill this, but kills a bunch of other stuff on the board, maybe hits some of your creatures but doesn't kill them, right? So if it's nighttime, in that case, you can do things like Crush the Weak, maybe not kill all of your guys, but even if it does kill some of your guys, you don't care, because it's going to end up dealing a buttload of damage to your opponent. There's also like Burn Down the House while we're on that tip, you know. If you just burn down the house with this, like, on its backside, and you have, like, 2 other creatures in play, I'm pretty sure you win the game that way, too, right? Like, almost no matter what happens, so... This actually has a few things about it that are just like downright silly, and I don't know why no one's talking about the card, because even in a vacuum with like no other synergy, Boros Reckoner is just kind of fine anyway. So I like this card a lot, and you probably, some of you, not all, but some of you probably haven't even really heard of this card. So here's your introduction to a card that I think you're actually going to be seeing a lot more than you think. But here we are at number 1. What is the card that has been most passed over, most dismissed, the card that no one seems to care about, and only you and I, dear viewer, can see the true potential in this card? Well, so far, no one has been paying attention to the man behind the curtain. I really think concealing curtains is real, guys. And this card has been dismissed time and time again by most content creators and like Reddit posters, Twitter posters. People talking about this card seem to universally say, like, maybe, but no, absolutely not actually. And I'm just not there yet. I think a 1-mana 0/4 isn't the best thing in the world, but it still blocks like everything important in the early game, right? Like it's going to block Werewolf Pack Leader and everything on down, and that's an important enough function. But starting on turn 3, and maybe not even on turn 3, maybe turn 4, maybe turn 5. Your opponent still has cards in their hand, and especially once we get around to turn 4, turn 5, those cards left in our opponent's hand are really, really important 90% of the time. So if you activate this even as late as like turn 5, your opponent still has cards in their hand, you're going to be getting something juicy, right? You can still get a Blood on the Snow. In some cases, if you drop this on turn 4, you can get immediately an unforetold Alrund's Epiphany. If you go ahead and play this on turn 1, they will foretell their Epiphany on turn 2, but sometimes you're going to be able to catch them flat-footed just by paying 4 mana all at once for this, which is an option you need to remember is on the card. I compare this to things like Thought Knot Seer. I don't think it's as good as Thought Knot Seer, but it's in the same like category as Thought Knot, or even Vendilion Click. So in a lot of cases, history has proven that even though your opponent gets to draw a card, you're still taking the best card out of their hand. And when there's extra turn spells and Esca's Chariots and really powerful Planeswalkers, Blood on the Snow, like so many things at like 4, 5, and 6 mana that are completely integral to most decks' game plans nowadays. Goldspan Dragons. You could go on and on like this all day. There are so many expensive cards in this standard that this can grab out of your opponent's hand, and so what? They draw a card. So what? You got the best thing. You got the thing that was going to kill you out of your opponent's hand. Again, history has proven that cards like this tend to be playable. So I would pay attention. I would keep my eye on this. I did the joke. Most people thought that the stats on this card and the sorcery speed of the ability meant that it was curtains for this, but I think it will be revealed that this is in fact a good card. Is that enough puns for this video? I feel like we didn't do a lot of puns at the beginning, but it's kind of backloaded with puns. So if you stuck around, you were delighted or irritated, because for some reason people hate puns. I don't get it. It's a very pure form of comedy. Just let me do my puns. But anyway, that's all my sleepers for this one. Let me know how you felt about all this down there in the comments section as usual. And anything you think that might be a sleeper that I missed here, and it might show up in our top 20 video. Keep that in mind, but I'm still interested in like little, tidbits of cards from the set that you don't think are seeing enough talk and all that I may not have talked about here. Yeah, I like Wedding Invitation too. There's like a million cards. There are a bunch of cards that could have ended up on this list, but I've only got so much room. And I've only got so much time. What, I'll be 30 minutes into this video already? I don't know. I talk too much. But in any case, I hope you enjoyed it. It's a good warm-up for the top 20 video and the deck techs and all that. But again, just like I said at the beginning, make sure you're submarined to the channel. Is there any other stuff I could say? Make sure you're submissive to the channel. That's so bad. I should not say that. Make sure you subscribe. I'll just use the actual word. Stop trying to be a wise guy. Sub to the channel and hit the bell for the notifications so that you get the top 20, the deck techs, the takes, all the tier lists, all that stuff. Because I do a lot of content and I enjoy making it. And I want you to see it. I made it for you. So sub to the channel if you haven't done it yet. Make sure you like the video if you liked it. And even if you didn't, just like it. It helps. And even just leaving a comment helps. So even if you go down there and you're like, Dev's a big dumb doo-doo head, don't do that. I'm really asking for it, aren't I? You know, all comments help with the algorithm, so I guess I'll take it, right? Aside from that, do any of this stuff, we'll be on Twitch playing this set as soon as possible, baby. So come up there and brew with us and play some games and have some fun. And follow on Twitch. So we're trying to get to billions followers on Twitch. Really, I'm just trying to get to like 10K followers on Twitch, and I'm halfway there, so help me out. But you can also put $1 in the Patreon pot every month, and that's all I really ask for. It supports the channel more than you can possibly understand. Just $1 a month helps a lot. And you'll get to help choose what videos and what decks we do during Crimson Vow season. And I think that's a pretty decent value for $1 a month. If I'm worth it, I think I'm actually worth a $1 a month, sir or madam. So help me out there if you feel like it. If you don't, I'm just glad that you're here. But I'm going to turn it over to you. Go down to the sideboard. Let me know how you felt about all this. And I will catch you cats later. I'm Dev from the Blaze. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.